Number 1.
One Saturday in 2008, I had the strangest encounter of my life. My cousin Anne and I were exploring the woods of Turner, Maine. My grandma always told me of the tree people she saw there as a child. I had never seen or heard them since I've lived in Maine, so I was very skeptical that they live. My iPod was stuffed in my pocket, and Anne was studying everything we passed. She believed all Grandma's stories. We came to an orange fence in the middle of the woods. The funny thing is, we own all this land. Mom and Dad would have heard about this. "Come on, let's jump over it," exclaimed Anne. She was overexcited. I sighed, but we made our way over the fence. As soon as we were over it, I felt like someone was following us. The hair on my back was standing up, and I didn't know why. I turned around to look back, but no one was there. Anne seemed fine, like she went here all the time. We were so far from that fence, my comfort zone. At one time, I was sure I saw 2 yellow-orange eyes, just like the color of the fence. Creepy. Suddenly, Anne yelped, "What the hell is that?" I turned and saw a skinny, slimy, brown creature staring at us. It had the same eyes that I'd seen earlier. It reminded me of a walking piece of bark. I was frozen. This thing made the hair on my head stand up. It made an awful scream that made my eardrums burst. I couldn't hear a thing for 5 minutes. The bark creature ran at such a speed that it was just a brown blur. Anne and I just stood there in shock. We made a beeline for the house. The next evening we went out again, but the orange-yellow fence was gone. The questions were ringing in my head. Had we really encountered the dwelling tree people? Where could that giant fence have gone? I knew I wasn't dreaming, because Anne remembers it too. I'll never venture that far into the woods again.
Number 2. My strange story took place on the 26th of September, 2009. My church was on retreat in Indiana, in a forest. The place we stayed at was a small building in the center of the forest. We decided that evening to go out and play in the forest with the children, so we came up with a game to play. It was like police. The kids were the police, and we would pick an adult to be the hostage. So when we began the game, we had to find the adult hiding in the forest in the middle of the night. So we started going around the back of the building, and we spotted a tall figure. It had to be at least 6 feet tall. It was running toward the trees where there was a small open area with tall grass that goes up to your knees. It ran with its arms at its sides, but it stopped at the edge of the tall grass, as if to wait for us to get closer. We chased after it, thinking it was the adult. When we were finally a few yards away, it dove into the grass and started to crawl very fast, almost snake-like. We got weirded out, but stood there staring at it. When it got across the tall grass, it began to climb a tree. It looked somewhat like a deformed cat-like animal when it was climbing. Then a few moments later, a kid yelled, "I see him!" And it was pointing in an opposite direction. We saw a similar figure running a couple of yards away, so we chased it. But then it vanished behind a tree. Turns out, a few minutes later we found the adult hiding in the parking lot in front of the building the whole time. So we have no idea what we saw that night in that forest. And I can attest, at least 15 other kids saw the same thing that I saw. And I know I'm not crazy. Number 3.
Do so-called hellhounds really exist? Where do they come from? And what would you do if you were being chased by one? It was about 4 or 5 years ago. I am 13 now. I lived in Modesto, California at the time. I moved away a year or so after this phenomenon. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a dark and gloomy night. My mom had just told my 2 sisters and me to get the mail. The mailbox was 50 or so feet away from our 1-story house, but I didn't really mind it. My sisters and I walked to the mailbox with ease. We got the mail and started our walk back home. As we started back to our house, we heard faint growling noises. Maybe it was our stomachs, or one of our neighbor's dogs that heard our footsteps. We ignored it and kept on walking. We started hearing it louder and louder now. We all looked back, and what we saw behind us was terrifying. A pure black dog with gleaming red eyes, almost like a Rottweiler, but more demonic. We started walking faster, and that thing was right behind us. We started sprinting, and the dog did the same. It started barking at us as we ran in a full sprint in sheer terror. We got back to our house, and the porch light was on. We all turned back, and what we saw behind us was shocking. Nothing was there. The dog vanished as if it was never there. My sisters and I looked all around the street for a sign of the dog. He had vanished into thin air. I am not crazy, nor are my sisters. It was not a dream. I remember it vividly like it was yesterday. We all ran into the house panting. We told our mom about our encounter with this dog. She, of course, did not believe us. We never saw that thing ever again.
Number 4. 2 years ago, in Janesville, Minnesota, in November during first deer season, I went out and sat in a tree stand in the early morning with my shotgun. I had heard growling and large footsteps. I thought it was a large coyote, but then it came out into the clearing, and it was 5 feet tall at the shoulder and dark brown, almost black like a large dog, only its front paws were almost hands, and its tail was long like a cat's tail, 3 feet long. As it growled, I could see its teeth. They were almost the size of my small shotgun shells, 2.5 inches. I watched it come my way, and I realized that it was following my scent. I, being scared and not wanting to die, raised my gun and pushed the safety forward. When it clicked, the animal looked straight at me and started to go right towards the tree I was in. I shot 3 times. The first 2 hit a tree behind it, but the third hit it in the chest, as far as I could tell. All it did was stumble. then turn and run into thick brush nearby. I was so scared that it might be out there that I stayed in the stand for 3 hours. At noon or so, I decided to make a run to the truck. When I got to where it had been hit, I only found a little blood, like the bullet didn't go through the skin, and the blood stunk and was dark red, almost black. So I ran to my truck. Later that year, when I was trapping, I saw its tracks next to a destroyed trap set and a bunch of blood and fur of a raccoon, from what I could tell. I have never gone back to those woods again. Number 5.
This event happened when I was a boy in Scottsdale, Arizona. It would have been around 1990, in the summer, July or August. I woke up to hear my mom screaming. Sleeping next to her, I woke up as well and saw her shouting and pointing at a figure across the room. Everything was dark, but the hall light was on, and the bedroom door was open, allowing some of the light in. The figure crouched on all fours on top of a dresser and was looking at her. When it saw me looking at it, it turned its head and looked right at me. It then jumped off the dresser and seemed to run out the open door, but it moved in a blur and was far too fast for a person. It dissolved when it hit the light. There was a feeling of great terror when it saw me. My mom and I talk about the incident occasionally, but she rarely discusses it since she is very religious. I am not, and thinks it had something to do with something evil. I've seen things similar to this since then, into my adult life, always preempted by feelings of being watched by some malevolent, stark-raving terror, and the urge to run and turn on the light. I saw it manifest in the daylight when I was a teenager, after waking up from a terrible nightmare. The entity struck the glass door near the couch where I slept, had its arms and legs spread before it darted away in a blur and faded like it did before. This incident isn't as credible as the previous encounter, since there were no other witnesses this time. It remains one of the most unexplained and truly horrific events of my life. Dad would have heard about this. "Come on, let's jump over it," exclaimed Anne. She was overexcited. I sighed, but we made our way over the fence. As soon as we were over it, I felt like someone was following us. The hair on my back was standing up, and I didn't know why. I turned around to look back, but
Number 1.
one Saturday in 2008, I had the strangest encounter of my life. My cousin Anne and I were exploring the woods of Turner, Maine. My grandma always told me of the tree people she saw there as a child. I had never seen or heard them since I've lived in Maine, so I was very skeptical that they live. My iPod was stuffed in my pocket, and Anne was studying everything we passed. She believed all Grandma's stories. We came to an orange fence in the middle of the woods. The funny thing is, we own all this land. Mom and Dad, a skinny, slimy, brown creature staring at us. It had the same eyes that I'd seen earlier. It reminded me of a walking piece of bark. I was frozen. This thing made the hair on my head stand up. It made an awful scream that made my eardrums burst. I couldn't hear a thing for 5 minutes. The bark creature, no one was there. Anne seemed fine, like she went here all the time. We were so far from that fence, my comfort zone. At one time, I was sure I saw 2 yellow-orange eyes, just like the color of the fence. Creepy. Suddenly, Anne yelped, "What the hell is that?" I turned and saw